Well, good afternoon. This is a session on epidemic and pandemic risk sharing solutions. My name is Leigh and I'm joined by my colleague Tina Kirby, who's a senior underwriter in our Munich Re Epidemic Risk Solutions department. We're going to walk you through a presentation today, perhaps introduce you to some new concepts. The product we're going to talk about is actually live. It's not just conceptual, but we really want to make this a dynamic session. So there will be some part of the presentation which tries to encourage interaction as to how we can further advance and develop the product going forward. I will start the presentation and then Tina will take you through the bulk of the presentation, the pilot solution, and then the interactive session. But let me just start by telling you a little bit about Epidemic Risk Solutions. It was a team that was set up by Munich Re in 2017 by the board to effectively be a consolidation point within Munich Re, a specialism for writing epidemic and pandemic risk across all business lines. So we had a history of writing life business, public sector, and there was a desire to develop a non-damage business interruption product as a standalone product. And so our efforts in 2017 since that time have particularly focused on building this market. I'll give you a little bit of background to this point. I think that prior to COVID-19, I don't think anyone could obviously anticipate a scenario where anything like COVID-19. So I guess the pickup of the product was slow, to say the least. Post the pandemic outbreak, we've absolutely been swamped by inquiries, but unfortunately, obviously, we don't cover COVID-19. But we're now starting to reach a point, I guess, in the market development where we are binding transactions. People are starting to look towards the future, thinking about what resilience means and long-term sustainability in the future. So I think it's a very, very good time to engage this audience to raise awareness and think about the development of this market going forward. I think what I'll do, Tina, is go probably straight to the first slide. Thank you. If you just go to the next one. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. So I guess the thing to say is that Munich Re, it wasn't necessarily that it had a crystal ball, but evidence was suggesting that outbreaks are only going to increase, and we can anticipate there will be more in the future. And that the only real question is what will be the impact? The frequency is increasing. But is it insurable? Well, I guess historically it depends on who you speak to. Many people have seen this as an uninsurable risk, but what we believe is we've developed a solution that can help organizations in a customizable way to address issues of epidemic and pandemic catastrophe, specifically to deal with things like business interruption, extra expense, but there are other iterations that we can also cover today. And I guess what is it we're trying to do here? We're trying to help organizations be able to better understand the risk they face, to measure, to monitor, and potentially to mitigate through the solutions that we've developed. If we go to the next slide, Tina. So why do we say that frequency of epidemic outbreaks is increasing? Well, statistics tell us that there have been an incredible over 1,400 epidemic outbreaks in 174 countries in the best part of a decade, and that was pre-COVID-19. That there are typically 200 epidemic outbreaks a year, and 5 newly emerging infectious diseases occur typically in any one year. I think we have to recognize that behaviors are changing. There are environmental shifts. You think of deforestation in South America, in West Africa, and what we're doing to increase farming output, urbanization, the migration of people from the land to the towns, greater mobility via travel. And what this all leads up to is a likelihood that this will only increase going forward. It's a bit of a gloomy message. Sorry, I've just moved my mic a little bit. Is that better? Is that a little bit better for people? Okay.
Yeah, you're a little bit further away now.
Okay, I'll put that there. Is that any better? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're seeing is this increasing exposure going forward, and what we are really trying to promote today is the fact that there is options available to organizations to actually address this going forward. I think we can't take the view that this is a 1 in 100-year event and it will never happen again in our lifetime, because statistics suggest that's not going to be the case. If we can go to the next slide, please, Tina. And this has been evidenced with the emergence of recent outbreaks. You know, if we think back to, probably in most people's memories, SARS is the first major outbreak that they can recall in their recent lifetimes. And what we've seen is an increasing number of outbreaks. And what the WHO introduced in 2007 was a new approach to assessing the impact of outbreaks, and developed a thing called a public health emergency of international concern. Now, this is really quite important because it's absolutely integral to the product that Tina's going to talk to you about. But essentially, what we are seeing with the likes of Ebola, we're seeing epidemics like Ebola, Zika in regions, but I just should also say, what is a pandemic? An epidemic is a regional outbreak, but that can develop into a pandemic and go global. If we go to the next slide, Tina. We'll now pass over to Tina, who I think will just run through some basic housekeeping.
Yeah, thank you, Leigh. So thank you, everyone, for tuning into this. I do need to start with a couple of those housekeeping parts, which is that this is an educational session and that we can't talk about pricing and we can't talk about terms and conditions specifically. Lloyd's is an ENS carrier in the US, and so we are restricted by that, and we are needed to be accessed as Lloyd's via an ENS broker. But I just reverse to the beginning. This is educational in both ways. So we would like to tell you what we at Munich Re have done based upon this slide in front of you and many other conversations. But we'd also like to hear from you today as to what else we should take into account, what else we should know, and how much further we should take the product. So get ready with your questions. I'm going to take you through what we have created in response to these pieces of feedback, and then I'm going to hand over to you, the audience, to decide what are the next main topics that we want to focus on the next iteration of this. So as Leigh said, fair to say we have a product and it is on sale now, but it is not selling like hotcakes yet. Lots of reasons for that. And we are in pilot mode at the moment to try and make ourselves efficient, but also effective. So that for you, for your clients, we have products that really fit the need. And that is meeting these questions here. So you've said to us that it is an unexpected, although some have predicted it, but an unexpected event, this pandemic, and there were many unexpected costs that came with it, and that the coverage needs to be able to respond to that, needs to be flexible, but it also needs to be quick. And there's a certain amount of distrust of the insurance policies because of the problems around the definitions that we have seen in other property BI policies. And so we need to make sure that we can make it as parametric, as objective as possible. And we've taken all of that into account, and we have come up with this first version that I'm going to talk you through now. And then you can tell us what's next. So the first thing we had to do was to create a non-physical damage trigger. So the biggest problem with creating a policy for pandemics and epidemics that covers things like business interruption is that in the past, business interruption has almost always been as a result of a physical damage, but a disease doesn't give that to you. There isn't a moment in time when the disease occurs and is impacting you as a business. And so we have used the WHO as an independent objective body to create these parametric triggers. Now, Leigh showed you that outbreak graph where you can see the number of outbreaks is increasing in frequency, but also in severity. And the ones that were the red dots were the ones that are the public health emergencies of international concern. So the WHO does three things for us. It records every new outbreak, because all of the local health authorities report into the WHO, and they record all these new outbreaks in something called a disease outbreak news. They then say what we should do about that. So is it a worrying one or not? Is it a public health emergency of international concern or not? So the scale element is given to us by the WHO as well. So is there an outbreak? Yes, we can see that in the DON, the disease outbreak news. Is it big enough that we should worry about? Yes, we can see that by the public health emergency of international concern, but that's global. So how do we then pin that down to me, my business, or the income feeders to my business? That's the suppliers and the customers and the distribution and the logistics that go into enabling me to run my business. And again, the WHO can help with that, but there are two options. So either we use the WHO to show where the disease is present and transmitting, and they record that. So follow on from the epidemic outbreak, they then say where it is. So has it had a transmission in Thailand, then in Italy, then in Europe, and then across into America, as an example, following the COVID path. But the alternative is to use local authorities. So local authorities will react to this public health emergency and take some action to try and mitigate and try and minimize the spread and the transmission of the disease across the population. So there are two choices of structure in that in itself. Those are the epidemiological triggers. So they are parametric. It's nothing to do with the insured or the insurer. And even down to the fact that COVID-19 wave 3 and 4, are they a new disease? Are they not? We go back to the WHO scientists. If they name it as a new thing, COVID-22, then it's a new disease and would be covered. Sadly, if you haven't bought the policy before COVID, then that building is on fire. So COVID isn't covered, but a new disease would be. And there are 200 diseases a year that are at epidemic level, and there are many more than I ever imagined. And many of those can reach scale. The question is where and will they reach you and impact your business? And that's the second part, the economic trigger. So if we've got the epidemic trigger, then we need to show that I was impacted by it. So did I have, and here's the protection, did I lose income? Did I get some extra expense I had to incur, PPE or changed environment or remote deliveries? Did I have debt service that I had to cover, but I wanted to buy insurance to cover that because my income might not have done? Maybe I've got increased costs of funding. I had to take out a loan and the normal price for that loan was inflated because of the disease. So you can buy a cover that is that gap between what it was and what it is during a stressed period. And there are other fixed costs depending upon what your business is. And there's rent, and there are many that I won't go into, and we might pick up on that later if any of you want to. But the one that I really want to mention now is supply chain, because of course, physical damage policies have a, can I say it, not very good way of dealing with those contingent exposures from your customers and suppliers. Because this is not linked to physical damage, this is linked to your business income flow, the money flow, then you can name the areas where your suppliers are, and they are included then in the coverage, so that if Italy is a main supplier to you and it has a lockdown there, maybe you don't in America, but you can't get your goods and therefore you can't sell in America, this policy would still be able to cover that because you've designated the Italian producer supplier as being somebody that, or an area that you wanted to cover. So then how does that actually work in practice? So there's a sort of standard cartoon picture here for the loss of profits element, but of course you could turn it on its head and it could be increased costs and expenses. So this is a simplistic version, but it shows you again those three flags that I talked to you about. So did it occur in my policy period, the outbreak? Yes, we know that from the WHO. Was it big enough of scale that this is going to be covered here? Yes, we know that because it'll be given a PHEIC banner or not by the WHO. Is it local to me? So is there that local restriction imposed upon me, or is there a local transmission if I've chosen that route? Once those three are ticked, as it were, then if you have economic impact at any point from the beginning of when the outbreak occurred through to the end of the extended epidemic period, and I'll come to that, then you, the insured, can choose where you want to position that camera lens of 6 months worth of claimable loss or extra expense. Let's go back to that extended epidemic period. If I had given you time to think about this, you would have worked out that actually you could have a new outbreak occurring right near the end of your policy period. Now, if that happens, then you might have the outbreak occur, but not the declaration of the public health emergency, and maybe not those local triggers, those local anchors we talked about. So this extended epidemic period is additional time within which those can happen. So the outbreak still needs to happen in your policy period, but this extra 6 months gives you that window for the circumstance to become concrete, if I can put it that way. But you can still choose your indemnity period right up until the end of that extended epidemic period. So in actual fact, what you get with this is 12 months of outbreak policy period, plus 6 months of did the outbreak turn into a big bad one, plus if you wanted to start at the very end of that, 6 months of indemnity. If actually my worst 6 months really started at the end of that 6 months. So you get 12 plus 6, which is 2 for 1. Whoever thought you'd get 2 for 1 in insurance? So there's a relatively flexible, I think, way of covering business impact. But here's a worked example that might help you see it in real life. This is COVID-19. So this is a person who bought the policy in December 2019. Let's wish somebody had, but they didn't. So the policy was on risk when the first disease outbreak news, which was January the 5th, by the WHO said that there is a new novel disease in Asia. It looks a little bit like pneumonia, but we're not sure what it is. And it was human transmission. It's important here. We're not covering animal diseases that stay in the animal population, but animal diseases are the ones that mostly jump across into the human population. And if they then spread within the human population, then it's absolutely covered. But we're not covering herd in agriculture. So human diseases and viral. Now, why viral? Because viral diseases are the ones that have the potential to cause you significant business impact. When you look at that list of outbreaks that Leigh showed you at the beginning, all bar one of those are viral. Some of those are influenza, but only one of those is bacterial, and that's the plague in 2014. All of the rest of them are viral. The WHO keeps a list of the top 10 worrying diseases. They're all viral. And the reason is because viruses are quick to adapt. They are highly transmissible and highly contagious. And they are the ones that we can't deal with quickly. We can't contain quickly. And that changes, therefore, how we as businesses, as local authorities telling us what to do, as individuals, change our behavior. And that change in behavior is what means you have a loss of income or extra expense that you have to incur. So going back to the example. So we have our first disease outbreak, and on the 30th of January, the WHO met and said, do we need to designate this as a public health emergency, which they subsequently did. And so your first two triggers are met there. And then the disease spread across the world. And this is a US insured, theoretically. And so they have designated their covered area as being the US and Canada, because they had exposure in both, or supplies in one and sales in the other. Now, they therefore are triggered epidemiologically on the 19th of March, when California issues its first statewide stay-at-home order. So now you're done for those red flags. So now you just have to say, was I financially impacted? Anytime between that 5th of January and the end of my policy period plus 6 months, was I financially impacted? And if I was, I can claim for that under the insurance here. And it's a 6 months, but it's consecutive 6 months that you choose, like a viewfinder laid over the top of that time period. Now, in addition to giving you the indemnity, and we can talk in a minute about types of the indemnity, the policy gives you some access to early money, crisis management money early on, as soon as the disease is declared, so the 5th of January. And that could be for prevention, mitigation, minimizing the loss as much as you can, but also you might not understand it. I didn't until I started digging into this. And so it also gives you 4 hours with an epidemiological expert so that they can help you understand what that means for you, for your business. And it's a very different thing if you're in mining or if you are in retail. So one other point that I didn't mention earlier, which was around target sectors. So if you'll allow me just to go back quickly to that. So target sectors, at the moment, we are looking at real estate. And real estate is a sector that has had a significant impact, but has not been destroyed. Now, it is very difficult if you are in hospitality and your hotel is shut and has been shut for a very long time to envisage buying and paying for new coverage. Real estate is one level up, and they have seen significant impact on rent, but they are also looking at the future and saying, but what do I want to do going forward so that next time this happens, we have a mechanism by which to deal with it, and I've got some protection. So real estate is very keen on this. Retail is very split between essential and non-essential retail. Obviously, non-essential has been hard hit until very recently. Healthcare is another emerging sector, and education. The two of them were quite concerned about COVID last year, but are now operating through COVID such that they are looking forward to the future and how they should protect themselves and be ready for the next iteration, sadly, of an epidemic or pandemic outbreak. Hospitality varies enormously, and many are not ready, but we are interested if people are. Manufacturing has its own issues around supply chain and customers, but we have a number of inquiries in that area. Construction is similar but different because we have the delay and startup concept rather than, strictly speaking, extra expense and lost income. Financial institutions, it's much more about extra expense, and production and media is very much about how do we work today through COVID, but looking ahead, also what do we do so that the expenses that we incur from the next one, which we now know will be significant, could be covered, and therefore will enable us to run our production. Now, all of those are the inquiries that we've had and the specific underwriting that we have developed. There are, of course, sectors outside of that, which we could develop into, and you can talk to me about that in a minute, but these are the ones that currently we are looking at in our pilot phase. So let's go back through here. One thing that you might have seen in the first piece of feedback was, what about the exclusions? What about those communicable disease exclusions that I've had slapped on where I thought I had to cover and maybe I did or I didn't, but I now definitely have an exclusion. So I thought it was useful just to show you where our policy does cover the things that are excluded now under the communicable disease exclusion. And of course, the exclusions vary. So I've given you a sample, which I think is representative of most of those. So the communicable disease exclusions tend to define communicable disease as any outbreak, epidemic, or pandemic that's named by the World Health Organization. Great, because we're covering anything that's named by the World Health Organization. And the difference is it's not any epidemic. For us, it's the ones that are of scale. So yes, the ones that are covered by the World Health Organization that they deem to be the public health emergency of international concern. But it also excludes SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, and we are also excluding that now. It excludes all other viruses. We would cover all other viruses, except anything that is a subject to a current public health emergency of international concern, which actually at this point in time is only polio, but that's the building on fire concept. And HIV, although we can take that out for most parts of the world. We are not covering bacterial, fungal, parasitical, other diseases, partly because of what I said to you, we want to cover the ones that give you business impact. But I know that bacteria can give a business impact to certain businesses, specifically food handling, food manufacturing. This is not designed to replace the product recall or product liability policy that you should be buying for those business types. So we aren't covering bacterial at this point. It goes on to say we're excluding, under a communicable disease exclusion, the shutdown of the insured production or restriction in movement. Well, that's exactly what we are covering. We are covering not just your shutdown, but also your partial closure. So let me turn that around and make it clearer. We are going to cover any local authority restriction that means you can't operate as you would have operated. So if you were a restaurant and you could have had 60 tables, now you can only do 30 because of social distancing, your business is impacted. You are going to be operating, but to a lower, lesser degree. So that difference would be covered, or the extra expense required to enable you to still operate would be covered. And the restrictions in movement is equally exactly what we're trying to cover here, because that is what is impacting whether you can do your business or not. As I said, we are not doing animals, but what we are very specifically making sure it's clear covering is the fear or threat of the disease. Because if you excluded fear or threat, then you actually wouldn't be covering anything at all, because all of these changes in behavior, all of these additional restrictions that are placed upon us are because of the fear or the threat of the disease. So this policy definitely does not exclude fear or threat. So that is what we've got already. That's ready to go, sold a few, but we'd love to get it even better so that it fits more to your needs. And this is where I turn over to you. So there are other solutions that we could build, that we should, other thoughts that we should build into what we have put together so far. I've talked about it at a high level. So now I would invite any questions on the Q&A functionality so that we can talk about the specific questions and needs and additions you think should be in there. And just while Leigh has a quick look through the questions that have put in already and hopefully can tell me one or two, I'm going to pick up claims. Claims, loss of income takes time because the income was expected to happen. You have to look back and see that it didn't happen, and then you need to claim retrospectively for that didn't happen. And that takes a while, and if that's what you're buying, you expect that. But actually many people have said to us, what I want is some money straight away, because I've got to spend money on my extra expenses. Or I just need some money for loss of income I know I'm going to have, but I need to bridge the gap. And so we are very close to being able to add in here expedited claims via an affidavit, signed affidavit. We are able to give a liquidity release, a percentage of the overall limit immediately that the financial impact has happened, and that can be declared. We are trying to get as parametric as we can, but retaining it as being insurance. And so to do that, we need to say that it has the right of audit, but we want to make it pay out without insurer interference as much as we possibly can. So I just wanted to make sure that I set the scene on that, but also open to further questions on that or any of the others. Leigh.
They're starting to emerge, Tina. I did just respond. There was a question on future mutations of COVID-19, which I did respond to. We don't cover future variants of COVID-19, but a new coronavirus we would. We've got a question, Tina, with regard to a reluctant government to place restrictions. So how would the client be affected if I guess there's a state that isn't willing to put in place any civil restrictions?
And I think that it is such a pertinent issue for America, because you have multiple different authority entities that can decide what to do independently of each other. So the first answer to that is if we or you insured believe that there aren't going to be restrictions, and by that, remember, I mean restrictions of all kinds, so curfews in hours, partial closures, restrictions in terms of how many people. If you think that none of that would happen, then you can go for the other option that I talked about, which was there is a local transmission. So we would still be triggered by epidemiologically in the same way. So the outbreak was in my policy period, it was big. And the third one would be there is a disease transmission in the US. So then you're not requiring there to be a local lockdown. The other way to look at that is to say the US is the covered area, the whole of the US. And so my example was a Californian stay-at-home lockdown, but actually the payout wasn't triggered until July. And that was because of this particular example that I chose. It was Texas. And so they didn't have any specific shutdowns or restrictions that affected them in a big way until much, much later on. But you are epidemiologically triggered by the lowest common denominator, if you want to look at it that way. So as soon as the first local restriction anywhere in the US, if that's your deemed covered area, happens, then epidemiologically you've ticked the boxes.
Mm-hmm. I've got some more coming in. With regard to it's just moved around. If a disease outbreak has happened in the past and were to recur, how would that be treated? So do we typically exclude all prior declared viruses, or is there a time where we may actually reintroduce that prior outbreak?
That's a great question, and it must have come from someone who's bought cancellation insurance, where they seem to exclude everyone that's just happened. This is deliberately not like that. So diseases generally become endemic, meaning they move from being something that's an epidemic that we are managing and that we mitigate and get to a level we can live with it. And when you are living with that disease, it's endemic. Swine flu is an example that many countries in the world are now living with as endemics, meaning there are a number of cases and or deaths, depending on what it is, per year in that country. So if it is endemic, then it is no longer a public health emergency of international concern. And these declarations have a time limit on them. So when I said polio is the only current one, Ebola had a public health emergency of international concern twice, actually. One, the 2014 outbreak, and one 16 outbreak, and one in the 2018 outbreak. But they come on and then they come off again. Once they are no longer a public health emergency of international concern, then if they re-rise, they would be covered under the next policy. So I said all viruses except for existing fights and HIV in certain parts of the world and COVID-19. I would add that we can cover influenza, but we, as a standard, we exclude it and then you can buy it back in. And there are reasons for that, because influenza is seasonal and frequent, and therefore the price for it is higher. But also, more importantly, most influenzas don't impact a business because we're used to dealing with it. But some can, and it is worth considering whether you want to have that as coverage. But other than those, all viruses would be covered. So yes, if we had Zika come up again and it was declared a FIC and it was in your local area, it would be covered if it caused you financial loss.
Okay, and Larry Glasser, I'm going to try and transmit this question, but if I communicate it incorrectly, let me know. But Larry's asking about capacity considerations. Should this be a pandemic with impacts similar to COVID-19 in the future, I guess? And are insurers and reinsurers prepared? And I guess what we should speak to is the fact that we're at the forefront. I think we're trying to lead the charge there. I think there is appetite, and Tina, I'll get you to maybe talk to some of the capacity in the different markets that we've spoken to. But I think we're at a very early stage, and I think people are looking to follow us into transactions that we have been originating and structuring. To date, we're very, very open to collaboration. We want to work with partners such as Lloyd's to really mobilize a greater level of capacity for future outbreaks. But I can't say they're prepared. But any comments you would make on future capacity for events beyond COVID-19, Tina?
I think I would add, if you're old enough, look back at terrorism. Everyone excluded it, and then gradually the capacity came back for it. I think that the Lloyd's market is an excellent group of peers in terms of capacity and expertise. And we are working with them and love the framework for that, so that we can add to the Munich Re capacity. It is a coverage that's systemic. So it does have a limit as to how much each carrier can take. So it is not and never will be a single carrier solution. It needs to be multiple carriers working together, and also multiple entities. So you see on that list there, it's also captives. So really interested in working with captives. And if there are any other questions around captives, we can go on to some other slides around that. But using the captives enables us, because Munich Re has the regulatory viable pricing and experience and expertise, you can outsource to Munich Re the pricing and structuring of quite a broad cover as a captive. And then the captive provides that to their parent and then reinsures what they want to the private market, to Munich Re and co-insurers. And then that way we've seen captives make really good use of the tax incentives and also provide broad cover, including COVID-19, to their parent, but doing it in a way that they can satisfy all the regulators, because they don't have the experience, but Munich Re does have the experience. So I think there is a way to go, as Leigh says, but there are people who are interested and have themselves ready to work alongside Munich Re when we have significant inquiries coming in.
I saw a question on minimum premium. I guess what I would want to just very quickly say is that we are probably would say that our target area is mid-market. We're not really trying to offer an SME product at this stage. That's very much been tied up with discussions, pool discussions. We are very much driving a sort of private initiative. Typically, we've kind of considered.
We can't go into the actual numbers of it.
Sorry.
Mid-market or mid-large is a good way of looking at it.
Good. So that's so let's just see. So I've got Ross Brown. So for captives, are they issued like cat bonds, but instead as a pandemic bond, or do captives then reinsure parametric cover with a carrier like Munich Re?
Why don't you talk about the capital markets aspect?
That's quite an interesting question. I think at this stage, Ross, just to say that we're primarily trying to mobilise the captive purely to provide capacity between ourselves, Munich Re, and the captive. I think if this scales up, it is certainly our intention that to really mobilise this market, this risk has to be transformed. Munich Re has an accumulation risk management requirement, so we can't take infinite amounts of this risk, and we will look at, and we are actively transforming risk for different balance sheets, including non-insurance balance sheets. So I think longer term, the aspiration would probably be that we may look at issuing cat bonds out of captives. We haven't transacted as such at the moment, and at this moment in time, it's very much around on the underwriting side rather than the issuance side. What do you attribute the low take-up rate to date? Maybe I'll throw a few things in, and then Tina, you add. I guess it's been a moving target to some extent. You know, we were literally like a help desk last year. Suddenly the phone was went from being relatively dormant to non-stop, and it was a bit like a help desk. But I think it was very much around ticking off, that people had done their job to inquire what was in existence, and whether we could cover COVID-19, which sadly we couldn't post March. And I do think, as I say, this event has gone on longer and longer than probably anyone intended. And I guess that's created question marks around what is the event that I need to insure for the future. And I guess the ones that we're binding now are those that have been impacted by COVID-19, but were not decimated. So, hospitality there hasn't been momentum, as Tina alluded to. But also, and let's be frank, it's not going to be a cheap solution. So I do think there is a price sensitivity as well. Anything you'd add, Tina, in terms of take-up rate?
I think I would only add to that there's there are many who are waiting to see COVID finished before they can put their time and resource into operational business again going forward. And so it does depend which sector you're in as to where you are on that journey through and out the end of COVID. And that's got a big impact on if you're buying for the future protection or not.
Okay, I'm just sort of jumping around trying to capture everything. I'm going to pass this one to you, Tina. Is this first party cover only? Does the coverage extend to third parties financially affected by the actions of the insured? For example, film media is the insured but shuts down production. Would the financial impact for all involved with that production be covered?
So I'll try and take this in parts and do re-ask if I've got it wrong. So it is at the moment a first party cover. So it is covering the insured's loss of income or rent or incurred costs and expenses that they have. For the film and media production covers that we have looked at, there are a number of sections around cast coverage, imminent peril coverage, and civil authority closure, which are all first party to the degree that someone who is spending money on the film will not get that money if the film is not made or not made until later, and or maybe incurring extra expense because of those impacts. So in there you are covering third parties' loss of income to a degree. We are thinking, and I think it's beyond your question, we are thinking that we need to go into general liability. So third party proper in terms of liability that people need in order to operate. So a general liability policy for a gym, for example, has now got an exclusion for communicable disease, but actually should they? And can we help by providing this kind of cover to them, which we aren't at yet. And so would love to hear if there is real interest in that. Did that answer the question, or have I not quite got it right?
It's anonymous, so but please do shout if you feel like it wasn't answered. Just on, I know you've covered claims and proof of loss, but let's just make sure everybody's clear on is proof of loss needed for the 6-month claim period? If you can just perhaps repeat on the claims.
So and let's also, while we're there, think about how do you do the language around income. So to try and make it as easy as possible, if your business interruption piece of your property damage policy says what you want it to say, then we can lift that out of your property damage and append it to the epidemiological triggers that make up the bulk of the pandemic coverage. And therefore, whatever the terminology is that you're used to under your existing property damage BI policies would be the same language that we would use here. So for a loss of income, you would then need to prove what you would have earned. Harder, I know, because we haven't got 3 good years to look back on. So it's a bit of a mess. And one of the reasons why we're mostly looking at extra expense, not loss of revenue, but also would be looking at the extra expense to show what kind of expenses you would incur or expect to incur. Now, here is where it deviates from what might be already in your property policy, because what we have found works very well is to look at the COVID-19 expenses. Some of them were quite unexpected, or the scale of them quite unexpected, and to put those as a sort of list of expected and covered extra expenses going forward. So one that sticks out for me is the employee benefits costs. So paying employees to be ill so that they don't come in to work and transmit the disease to others, or they don't come into work and then put off the customers coming in to work. So employee benefits was quite a big aspect, and that could be covered. So we take what has been an expense in COVID-19 and use that as an example, and thinking broader, because not all diseases are going to look like COVID-19. What other expenses do you think that you might incur for your business? And that could range from extra transportation to additional expenses for enabling your factory or your office to be compliant and hygienic, through to testing kits and testing procedures to enable people to come in and out of the site, and employee benefits or bonuses for working through the crisis period, as I've said. So I think all of those hopefully help you to understand how we could put that in the narrative of the contract. And then the claim part of it is either as you are used to, or as I said, we're trying to go from the insured say this is our lost income or our incurred extra expense, and it needs to then be adjusted by an adjuster and agreed, to a more single page affidavit solution where the CFO and another C-suite member declares that the loss is in excess of the 10, 25 million policy limit that they've purchased, and that is enough to allow for the payment. Now, it needs to stay insurance, so although we can get it as quick as we can, we need to retain the language that says the right to audit. But we are aiming to be as parametric as we can. So if you can get it, if we can get it to the point where it's, I had the outbreak, it was big, it was local, and I've given you a piece of paper that I've sworn on which shows the loss, and we pay you, that's what we're going to try and do.
Mm-hmm. Seth Shapiro has rightly asked about deductibles, co-insurance, which is somewhat flexible. Do you want to just respond to our attitude or our approach to determining deductibles and co-insurance?
So it does slightly vary as to what business you're in. I veer towards preferring co-insurance because I think that those epidemiological triggers are taking you out of the noise anyway, because any small epidemic wouldn't be a public health emergency of international concern. So the deductible was generally intended to remove you from those small and time-consuming losses, but I think that the epidemiological triggers take you out of that scenario. So I prefer to go for a co-insurance. On the other hand, I think that if you're in education, then a 14-day deductible might be right, so that you are clear that quarantining for an outbreak is not covered, but the bigger, longer-term outbreaks are covered. So I think it varies depending upon what business you're in.
Then could you just maybe just quickly go over the FIKE plus transmission? There's a question as to, I guess, the confidence one can have in the transmission numbers and whether they're real or not. But perhaps you could just, because obviously we focused on FIKE plus civil restriction, but could you just walk through the transmission one more time?
So the WHO website, and if you want to take the time to look it up, then it's there. It's not that clear, which is one of the reasons why Munich Re stands ahead above others, is that the data within the WHO needs to be taken out and analyzed in order to make good sense of it. But their reporting of it in the moment is very good. So they have a mechanism called the disease outbreak news, which is regular and whenever needed, and it declares when new epidemics have occurred, and it says what they think it is and where it is. They then go on with further disease outbreak news or updates to say this disease has now moved to this, and this country, and there are this, and this number of cases and deaths. And those are recorded and reported as they're received and stored within the WHO system. So those would be the ones that we would look to say, you're in the US, so you are triggered by whether there is a local transmission. So we would look to the WHO reporting, and it says there is a transmission in Massachusetts of this disease, therefore you would be triggered.
Very good. And then the final one I seem to have at the moment, though, please clarify the person asking the question if this doesn't. Will you be selling this through a HSB equipment breakdown type model, in brackets bolt-on with 100% quota share? I'm not entirely sure I know if someone would like to expand on that. That might be helpful, unless that makes.
Well, let me answer what part of that, and then and do type away the questionnaire if you want a different answer. So this, as I described, is a non-physical damage trigger. So it does not sit in with your property damage policy. So no, it's not an add-on. You can buy it with and as part of a suite of coverage. But because if you look on the left, the main part of this is a non-physical damage epidemiological triggering mechanism. It cannot bolt on to your existing property damage policy, whatever it is, whether it is property damage due to wind or quake or fire or machinery breakdown. So no, it doesn't bolt on. Yes, you could buy it beside. And would we do it as a 100% reinsurance of someone? Yes, Munich Re is a reinsurance company, so we can work with primary partners who will offer this as a coverage that we would reinsure. What I'm talking to you about now is the direct sales avenue. So Epidemic Risk Solutions can do both, but at the moment in the pilot period in the US, we're looking at the direct sales. Does that answer the question, or is there a variation?
There's been no further. I'm just trying to look for time. So we're at 4:50. Enya, I don't know what time you were planning to wrap up, but I don't have any more questions on the Q&A to cover. But I guess maybe we should just
say thank you then for everyone and the questions. It's been really great. I know it's hard with a big audience for everyone to get their say in. And there's a lot more, I'm sure, going through your head at the moment. So thank you for your thoughts. Please keep them coming. We don't want to just hear you. We want to turn this into something that is therefore really useful to you and, if you're brokers, to your clients. So if you do have further questions, then you can post them into the Lloyd's team, and then they will answer. We will help them to, or use your broker to access, as we said at the beginning. And really want to make this a collaborative development pilot period where we get the most feedback we can so that we can end up with something that really works, that you're confident about using, and that we can deliver to you in the most efficient way and improve the service level with which you can get these kind of solutions provided to you.
And I hope I've transmitted the questions as people ask them, but I think Enya will also give a team email to participants should they want any clarifications.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Tina, so much, and Leigh, for your insight and for taking the time to share with us what's going on right now on the solution side. As Tina and Leigh mentioned, they are happy to take your feedback and take back their team and refine the solutions as we move along. As all you heard from Tina and Leigh's comments, this is not an easy solution, and there's nothing easy in this field. And they're willing to, again, work with all of you in finding the best solution involving the public and private sectors and the clients from the captive space. So it's totally a partnership, and we would love to hear from you further. As you may see on the chat box, we have ers@munichre.com. If you have any further thoughts and questions, please reach out to Munich team on this email address. At the same time, we hope to see you in tomorrow's program at RIMS, which will have the team of innovation from Lloyd's Corporation being on the stage and shows you what's new on the innovation space at Lloyd's. With that, we thank everyone. Again, thank you, Tina. Thank you, Leigh, for your great insight, for your time, and for your sharing with us what's going on right now. Very exciting. Also, a lot of challenges ahead of us. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you all.
Bye.